It happened 2 years ago, in early November, the day I turned 28. I remember the air that day had that kind of still cold you only get in the Pacific Northwest, where the fog hangs low and everything feels heavy. I'd been working at this small, double-sided drive-through coffee stand for about a year, tucked off a back road about 30 minutes outside of Seattle. Most people who stopped by were regulars heading home from work, the same faces I saw every evening. I'd always worked closing shifts during the week and openings on weekends. I didn't mind it. The quiet never bothered me. Even when the sun went down and I was the only one left, I felt safe, locked inside that little box of light surrounded by trees and asphalt. I'd heard stories from other baristas about creeps who followed them home or lingered around their stands after closing, but those always felt like things that happened to someone else. That feeling ended on my birthday. It was Thursday, November 7th, around 6:45 p.m. I was wiping down the counters, cleaning the espresso machine, already thinking about heading home. After 6:30, I rarely got customers. It was pitch dark outside, the lot empty except for my car parked beneath the single flickering streetlight. I remember leaning down to grab the sanitizer bottle when something caught my eye, movement just beyond the glass. I froze. A man was standing outside the closed window beside me. He hadn't made a sound. Not a single footstep, no gravel crunching, nothing. Just standing there, completely still, smiling at me through the glass like he'd been waiting for me to notice him. The smile didn't look natural. It was too wide, too stiff. At first I thought he might have been one of the transients who sometimes wandered through asking for water. I normally didn't serve walk-ups after dark, but since he'd already seen me, I figured I couldn't just ignore him. So I opened the window a crack and gave him a polite greeting, the kind you use when you're already uneasy. He introduced himself as Ivan, said it slowly, like he wanted me to remember it. He looked about my age, clean clothes, short dark hair, a bit of an accent. Eastern European, maybe Russian, but it was his eyes that got to me. They were clear and bright, but empty at the same time. When he looked at me, I felt this instant, unexplainable discomfort, like my body knew something I didn't yet. He didn't order anything right away, just kept standing there, studying me. I asked what I could get started for him twice, and both times he just smiled before asking me where I was from, how long I'd worked there, if I liked it. He was calm, polite even, but something about the way he spoke made my skin crawl. It wasn't what he was saying, it was how deliberate it all felt. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you have a boyfriend?" I didn't even hide my irritation. I said no, told him I had to finish closing up, and turned away to make it clear the conversation was over. As he stepped back from the window, he smiled again. "I'll see you very soon," he said softly, and walked away into the dark. That was the last thing I wanted to hear. I locked up faster than usual that night. Even when I got into my car, I felt like I was being watched. The next day, I told myself I was overreacting. Just another weird customer, nothing more. That Friday evening around the same time, I was cashing out the register when I noticed movement outside again. When I turned toward the other window, my chest tightened. Ivan was standing there, smiling, waving at me through the glass. But this time, instead of waiting, he reached out and slid open the window himself. No one ever did that. The way he did it, calm, slow, like he owned the space, made my body go completely tense. "I'm closed," I told him, voice low but steady. "You'll have to come back tomorrow." He just smiled wider and said, "That's okay. I didn't come for coffee. I came for you." I felt a pulse of anger mix with the fear. I told him to leave, that I was done for the day, and that he needed to go. His smile vanished, replaced by that same cold, unblinking stare. "Then I'll see you tomorrow," he said, tone flat, before turning and disappearing behind the building. I didn't move for almost a minute. I could feel that he was still close, even though I couldn't see him. I finally forced myself to shut everything down and run to my car. The whole drive home, I couldn't shake the image of that expression, that strange confidence in his voice when he said he'd see me again. The next morning was Saturday, my early shift, starting at 5. It was still dark when I opened, and I kept glancing at the security cameras while I worked, half expecting him to appear on one of the screens. The first few hours were normal. Then, around 8:30, I saw a familiar old pickup roll into the lot. It was my ex, Jonathan. We hadn't talked in months. He cheated, and that was that. So when he pulled up, I was confused. He said he just wanted to wish me a happy birthday, that he'd been thinking about me. I was in the middle of telling him I didn't want to talk when I noticed someone walking toward the stand from across the lot. Ivan. He looked different this time, pale, eyes red, like he hadn't slept. He was crying, or looked like he had been. I whispered quickly to Jonathan not to leave. He must have seen the look in my eyes because he nodded without question. Ivan stopped at the opposite window. I told him I wouldn't serve him and that he needed to leave, but he cut me off mid-sentence and threw something through the opening. It landed with a flat smack on the counter. A passport. His passport. "I don't need this anymore," he said. That's when my stomach twisted. No one gives up their passport unless they're about to do something irreversible. He looked at me like he knew that I understood. Then, almost whispering, he said, "God came to me last night. He told me you are my wife. You belong to me. You come with me now." He started climbing onto the window ledge. I slammed it shut, locking it, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the latch. His face changed in an instant, tears gone, eyes wide and wild. Then he vanished from sight. Seconds later, I heard the beeping from the back door keypad. He was trying to get in. I told myself there was no way he could guess the code, and then I heard it. The lock disengaging. The door began to open. A long blade appeared first, his hand wrapped tight around it. I screamed, loud enough that it echoed off the walls. Then I ran to the front window, pounded on the glass, and yelled for Jonathan. "He's got a knife!" Jonathan was out of his truck in seconds. I barely had time to turn before Ivan came through the door, knife in hand, whispering the same words over and over. "You are my wife. You are my wife." Then, out of nowhere, Jonathan appeared behind him, wrapping an arm around his throat and yanking him backward so hard that Ivan's feet left the ground. The two of them crashed outside, Jonathan locking his arms around Ivan's neck, shouting that he'd choke him out if he moved. Ivan went limp. No fight, no resistance. Just that same calm, eerie stare directed straight at me. The police got there minutes later, though it felt like hours. They swarmed the place, took the knife, and dragged Ivan to the cruiser. He didn't struggle. He just kept repeating, "She's my wife. God told me. She belongs to me." I quit that job not long after. Every time November rolls around, I still think about that birthday, the one that could have easily been my last. It was November 2011, and I had just turned 21. I'd finished university a few months earlier and moved to Manila for an internship with a peacebuilding NGO. On the side, I was playing semi-professional football in the country's national league, a strange mix of worlds that somehow made sense to me back then. I was young, idealistic, and maybe a bit too trusting for my own good. That Saturday afternoon, it was raining hard, the kind of warm, relentless rain that turns the city into a maze of umbrellas and reflections. Training was canceled because the pitch was flooded, so instead of heading back to my flat, I decided to check out a fruit market I'd read about in my Lonely Planet guide. This was before Google Maps was everywhere, so I was mostly wandering, following a few scribbled directions on paper and my own misplaced confidence. Somewhere near a busy intersection, I must have looked completely lost because two women, one middle-aged and one in her early 20s, approached me with a shared umbrella. They asked where I was headed, and I told them about the fruit market. We started talking, and in that casual way conversations sometimes twist. They mentioned they used to live in London, the same neighborhood I was from. It seemed like too much of a coincidence to question. Maybe it was homesickness, or maybe I was just eager to believe in good luck, but that tiny connection lowered every bit of caution I might have had. They told me the market I was looking for wasn't great and that they knew a better one, but we'd have to take a taxi to get there. I hesitated, but they were friendly, smiling, and insistent, and I didn't want to seem rude or ungrateful. So, I got in the cab with them. The driver took us through narrow, twisting back streets that looked more like alleys than roads. The buildings grew closer together, and the noise of traffic faded until it was replaced by the hum of distant music and rain against corrugated metal roofs. When the taxi stopped, I realized we weren't near any market, at least not one that sold fruit. They led me through a small maze of side streets until we reached a plain, two-story building that looked like any other home in that part of town. They said we should rest inside and have something to eat first. Every instinct in me was uneasy, but I told myself it was fine. Just cultural hospitality, right? Inside, the place was dim, cluttered, and smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and fried food. A small TV was playing karaoke videos, and sitting near it was a man who didn't say much, just nodded as we came in. They offered me a beer, and I watched closely as they opened it in front of me. I remember thinking that as long as I saw the cap come off, I'd be safe. We sang a few songs, laughed a bit, and I tried to play it casual, even though I felt this strange pressure in my chest. That sense that something was off, but you can't quite name it yet. After a while, one of the women brought out a tray of barbecued pork. I was hungry, and honestly, I didn't even think twice. If I was careful about anything, it was the drink, not the food. I took a bite, and instantly there was this odd, bitter, almost chemical taste to it. Before I could think about what that meant, I started feeling heavy. My eyelids were like sandbags. The last clear image burned into my mind is of the younger woman standing close to me, holding the microphone, singing Hey Jude with this strange, almost teasing smile. The chorus echoed in my head as my vision blurred. Then, everything went black. The next thing I remember is waking up in a dark room, the air thick and unfamiliar. I sat up, confused, trying to piece together where I was. My head throbbed, my mouth was dry, and for a moment, I thought I was dreaming. When I finally stumbled outside, it was night, and I wasn't in Manila anymore. Somehow, I was in Davao, nearly 1,000 kilometers away. The terrifying part is that I had actually been scheduled to fly to Davao the next day for work, so technically, I was supposed to be there, but I have no memory whatsoever of how I got on that plane. My colleagues said I seemed fine when I arrived, just tired, but I don't remember the airport, the flight, the taxi, nothing. When I finally checked my bank account, $200 had been withdrawn. My wallet and phone were still on me, which only made things stranger. I later learned that a drug called Ativan, common in the Philippines, could make someone compliant while wiping out their memory completely. People could walk, talk, even function normally, but afterward, they'd have no recollection of what happened. I don't know what happened in those missing hours, whether I was just drugged and robbed, or if something far worse occurred. The details are gone, dissolved somewhere between that last bite of barbecue and waking up in another city. I only know that something terrible happened to me, and I'll never get those lost hours back. I came to the US from Serbia when I was 13, back in the early 90s. My mom and I were moving to join my older brother, who had been living in New Jersey for a few years. He was 15 years older than me, married, and already settled. I was told we were finally going to live together as a family again, though I didn't know at the time that my mom had no plans to stay permanently. When we landed at JFK Airport in New York City, we were tired and nervous, but excited. The plan was for my brother to meet us there. I remember clutching a little paper with his address and phone number written on it. That was all we had. But when we passed through customs and finally stepped into the arrivals hall, he wasn't there. We waited for what felt like forever, scanning every face, but there was no sign of him or his wife. This was before everyone had cell phones, so there was no easy way to call or check where he was. After about half an hour of anxious waiting, a tall man suddenly approached us. He called out our names in perfect Serbian, smiled warmly, and introduced himself as my brother's co-worker. He said he drove taxis with him, and that my brother couldn't come because his wife had gone into labor. The baby was coming early. He told us not to worry, that he'd been sent to pick us up and take us to my brother's home in New Jersey. My mom immediately relaxed when she heard him speak our language. He seemed friendly, polite, and well-informed about my brother and his wife. They started chatting easily, laughing about how unpredictable babies could be. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, or how his smile never quite reached his eyes. I didn't know. I just knew I didn't like him. We drove for what felt like hours through unfamiliar roads. My mom tried to make conversation while I stared out the window, watching the city fade into suburbs. After a while, the man said he was going to stop for breakfast, since we'd been traveling for so long. That sounded fine, until he pulled up in front of a house instead of a restaurant. He told us cheerfully that his wife was inside cooking and that we should come in to eat before continuing the drive. My mom hesitated, but didn't want to appear rude. When I whispered that something felt wrong, she scolded me quietly and said we should be grateful for the man's kindness. So we followed him up to the house. Inside, it was dark, messy, and cold. The air smelled like dampness and old food. My mom tried to make polite conversation, but I could tell she was starting to sense something was off too. When she asked him again when we'd be going to my brother's, his expression changed. He grabbed her wrist and said something that froze my blood. He told her he needed a wife to take care of him, that his house needed a woman, and when he heard my brother talking about her coming from Serbia, he decided she'd be the one. My mom shouted and tried to pull away. I threw myself at him, punching and kicking, but he hit me so hard that I saw flashes of white and nearly blacked out. He locked me in the basement while dragging my mom upstairs. The room was cold, concrete, and smelled of detergent and mildew. I screamed and pounded on the door, but it was useless. The sound barely carried beyond the walls. That became our life for a week. He'd let us out early in the morning so my mom could cook breakfast for him. After that, he'd lock us back downstairs before leaving for work. There was a small bathroom and an old laundry room down there, but that was it. At night, when he came home, he'd unlock the door and watch us while he ate. It felt like living in a nightmare. One morning, while he was gone, I found a small window high up near the ceiling. It was barely big enough to fit through, but I climbed on some boxes and managed to open it. My mom whispered that I had to go, that I needed to find help. I didn't want to leave her, but she pushed me toward the window, begging me to run. I crawled out into the freezing November air, barefoot, wearing only shorts and a t-shirt. My skin was blue from the cold, and I could barely see where I was going, but I ran down the street until people started noticing me. A few neighbors tried to talk to me, but I didn't understand what they were saying. I waved my arms, trying to get them to follow me. Eventually, someone called the police. When the police arrived, one officer tried to coax me into his car. That's when I saw the man. He'd pulled up in his taxi at the end of the street. The moment he spotted the police, he turned and sped away. I started yelling and pointing toward the direction of the house, and the officers followed me. They broke in and found my mom still inside. It took hours for them to find someone who could translate Serbian so we could explain what had happened. My brother was called, and when he arrived, he was in shock. His friend had told him we never showed up. My brother had been calling family back home, terrified that we'd missed our flight or been detained. The man disappeared before he could be arrested. Back then, before tighter airport security and digital records, it was easy for someone to vanish. My mom couldn't handle the trauma and went back to Serbia not long after. I stayed, finished school, and later joined the military police, inspired by the kind officer who helped save us that day. Even now, decades later, I can still remember the sound of that basement door closing behind me, and the moment I climbed through that window into the freezing air. It was the day I realized that instincts are never wrong. I grew up in the quiet countryside of northern England, where nights were pitch black and the loudest sound was usually the wind cutting through the trees. When I moved to London 6 years ago, it felt like stepping into another world entirely. The constant hum of buses, the orange glow of streetlights, the sound of people's lives never really stopping. My partner had landed a new job in the city, so I followed her down, trying to adjust to the chaos that replaced the stillness I was used to. At the time, I didn't drive, so most evenings I took the same bus home from work, then walked the short distance back to our flat. The walk was never long, maybe 10 minutes, and it was always through a lively area, with restaurants still serving late diners and shop windows glowing even after dark. I used to feel safe there. That was before November rolled in, bringing the kind of early darkness that makes even familiar places feel different, almost distorted. It happened one Friday night, just a couple of months after I'd moved. One of my colleagues, a woman I'd recently befriended, asked if I wanted to grab a drink after work. My partner was working late, and I was still getting used to London life, so I figured why not. We went to a small pub near her neighborhood, not far from mine, though I didn't know the area well. I only had 2 or 3 drinks, enough to feel warm, but not drunk. Around 10, I said my goodbyes, wanting to catch a bus before it got too late. I remember pausing by the bar to drop off my glass and glancing down the counter. A man sitting there caught my eye for a moment. Tall, lean, maybe around my age, short hair shaved close to his scalp. I gave a polite half smile, one of those awkward little gestures people do when they accidentally lock eyes, and then left without another thought. Outside, the air was sharp with that cold, damp feeling that always seems to hang over London in November. The bus stop was across the street, about 200 yards away, and I could see it from the door. I'd barely made it halfway when a strange sensation crept up the back of my neck, that instinctive prickling that tells you someone's looking at you. I turned, trying to make it look casual, and froze when I saw him. The man from the bar. He was walking behind me, not too close, maybe 20 paces or so, but his eyes were locked straight on me. I told myself I was imagining it. It was a Friday night after all. People were out everywhere, heading home or to another pub. I tried to act normal and kept walking. When I reached the stop, I checked the board and silently thanked God that my bus was only a few minutes away. A moment later, he arrived too, stopping just a few feet away from me. I stared at my phone, pretending to scroll, but I could feel him watching me. When I finally looked up, expecting him to glance away, he didn't. His expression didn't shift at all. It was such an intense, unblinking stare that I started to feel trapped by it. Then he gave me this slow, deliberate wink. Not playful, not teasing. It was cold. Like he was letting me know that he saw through me, that I knew he was watching, and he enjoyed it. When the bus came, I got on fast, hoping he wasn't following. My heart sank when I heard his footsteps right behind me. I sat near the driver, trying to appear calm, but my pulse was racing. The seat beside me was taken, so he sat across the aisle. He didn't take his eyes off me the entire time. His face was unreadable, except for the faintest twitch of a smile that made my skin crawl. Every stop that passed felt like an eternity. I kept hoping he'd get off before mine, that I'd been overreacting, that this was just some bizarre coincidence. But as we moved deeper into the route, I realized the bus had veered off the main road into a quiet housing estate. It hit me then. I wasn't on my usual route. The streets outside were unfamiliar, lined with silent houses and barely any streetlights, the kind of place where, if you screamed, no one would hear you. I rang the bell at the last second, hoping to catch him off guard. The moment the doors opened, I bolted off the bus. I didn't even look back, just walked quickly, pretending to know where I was. Within seconds, I heard the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement behind me. He'd gotten off too. I thought about calling someone, but my partner was at work and couldn't answer her phone. My family was hours away. The only person nearby was the colleague I'd just left, and she didn't pick up. I stood there, panicking, while he leaned against the bus stop just a few feet away, hands in his pockets, smiling faintly like this was some kind of game. After a few minutes that felt like forever, he suddenly spoke. "What's your name?" His voice was low, almost casual. My brain froze for a second before I lied. Amy. It was the first name that popped into my head. He smirked. "Give me your number, Amy. Let's be friends." He said it like it wasn't a question. I told him no, trying to keep my voice steady. His face twitched. The smirk disappeared, then came back sharper, thinner. "Where do you live?" he asked next, stepping closer. "I'll walk you." I told him I was waiting for a friend, that he was on his way to pick me up. It was another lie, but I hoped it would be enough to make him back off. He just stood there, watching me, silent for a moment. Then, through clenched teeth, he said, "Give me your number." I stepped back. He stepped forward. Before I could move again, he grabbed my wrist, hard. The look on his face changed instantly, the charm gone, replaced with this ugly flash of anger. "No need to be such a bitch about it," he hissed. His grip was tight, almost burning. I twisted my arm and somehow managed to break free, stumbling backward. That's when something in me snapped. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back, at least not until I heard footsteps pounding the ground behind me. When I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him chasing me, his expression twisted with rage. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like they were going to give out. But I kept running because I knew if he caught me, that would be it. Then, out of nowhere, I saw 2 police officers walking toward me from the end of the street. The sight of them hit me so hard, I almost started sobbing right there. I sprinted toward them, yelling for help. When I reached them, I could barely get the words out between my crying and gasping. I turned to point behind me. The man was there. But now he was walking calmly in the opposite direction, like nothing had happened. One of the officers went after him, but he disappeared around the corner and was gone by the time they reached the main road. The other officer stayed with me, took a statement, and eventually walked me home when I admitted I wasn't sure where I was. I shook the whole way there, barely able to unlock the door. When I finally got inside, I collapsed into bed and cried until I fell asleep. I never heard from the police again about it. I don't think they ever found him. But I know what I saw in his face that night. Someone hunting for a victim, someone who got a thrill out of fear. And sometimes, especially when I'm alone in the city at night, I can still feel that same prickling at the back of my neck, the same cold certainty that someone's eyes are on me again. When I was 13 and in my second year of high school, there were always strange stories going around when winter came. Every year, just as the days got shorter and the air colder, people would start talking again about a man in a white van who supposedly drove around snatching kids off the street. Nobody ever knew where the story came from, but it was enough to creep everyone out when it got dark early in November. That day had been ordinary enough. I walked home from school with my friend Emma like I always did. We were taking our time, laughing about something, dragging our feet because neither of us wanted to start our homework yet. When we reached the end of her street, she waved and turned off, and I kept going down the long hill toward my house. There were only a few houses along that stretch, and ours sat on the edge, right next to a wide open field that stretched out behind it. When I got home, it was quiet. My parents were both at work, and they wouldn't be home for at least another 2 hours. I went straight to the kitchen, grabbed some biscuits, and turned on the TV like always. It was already getting dark outside, and the light in the kitchen made the windows reflect my own movements faintly, like I was watching someone else. During a commercial break, I noticed something strange, a faint light moving through the window on the back door. I turned to look and saw headlights slowly crossing the field behind the house. A red car was bouncing over the uneven grass, which immediately seemed strange since there was no road back there. It stopped about 50 feet from the door. I watched for a second, confused, until a man got out. At first, I thought maybe he was lost or his car had broken down. I opened the small top section of the kitchen window and called out, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away, just started walking toward me. As he got closer, I felt a cold wave of unease run through me. He was maybe 30, with dark hair and average clothes. When he reached the door, he spoke in this quiet, flat tone. "Could you please open the door?" I told him I didn't have the key, even though it was sitting in my jacket pocket on the couch. Then he asked if anyone else was home, and without thinking, I said no. His eyes didn't move from mine, and he suddenly grabbed the handle, trying to twist it open. My stomach flipped, and I ran to the phone in the living room, shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I called my dad and yelled that someone was trying to get in. He asked if the doors were locked. The back was, but I realized the front wasn't. I sprinted for it, hearing the faint sound of movement outside as I fumbled through my jacket pockets for the key. My dad stayed on the phone, his voice tense, telling me to lock everything and yell that I was calling the police. I finally got the front door locked, ran back to the kitchen window, and shouted that I was calling the cops. The man froze for a second, staring at the house. Then he turned, walked quickly back to his car, and drove off across the field, his taillights disappearing into the dark. After that night, everything changed. Every winter evening, I'd start running the second I said goodbye to my friends, and I didn't stop until I was home with the doors locked. The story of the man in the white van didn't scare me anymore, because I'd seen what could be waiting outside your door when you least expect it. My name's Leah, and I live in the north of France, in one of those quiet family neighborhoods where everyone knows each other by sight. I was 15 when this happened. My parents were separated, and since my mom worked long night shifts as a nurse, I was used to being alone at home a lot. It was November 2021, cold, damp, and the kind of month where darkness settles in before you even realize the afternoon's gone. That evening around 7, I was watching something on my phone when I suddenly heard a few loud knocks on the front door. They weren't light taps, they were strong, deliberate hits, and they made me freeze completely. I wasn't expecting anyone. After a few seconds, everything went quiet again, and I forced myself to move, to go look through the peephole. Nothing. The porch light flickered a little, but no one was there. I stood there for a moment, heart racing, and then told myself it must have been some neighborhood kids playing a prank. For the next few nights, everything was calm. Then 4 days later on Saturday, I had two of my friends, Louise and Satine, come over for a movie night. My mom was working again that evening, so it was just the three of us in the house. We made popcorn, curled up in the living room, and were halfway through a movie when I went upstairs to grab my phone charger. A few minutes later, I heard Louise calling my name from downstairs, her voice a bit uneasy. When I got to the stairs, they both looked tense. They told me they'd heard the same loud knocks I'd mentioned earlier. At first, they thought it might have been my mom coming home early, but when they opened the door, the porch was empty. We tried to laugh it off. Louise said it was probably just our imagination running wild. Eventually, the mood settled back down, and the rest of the night went fine. For a while, I thought it had all been just random bad luck. But the following Wednesday night changed that. It was already dark when I got home from the grocery store, carrying a small bag with a box of pasta for dinner. I ate alone, cleaned up, and then went upstairs to finish some homework. I put on my headphones and turned up the music to stay focused. I don't know how long I'd been sitting there when I started feeling something strange. Soft vibrations through the floor, like faint thumps coming from below. I thought it was my rabbit, who had a habit of thumping his cage when he was hungry, so I ignored it. But the noises got louder, sharper, like someone was hitting the walls. Then, I heard the dishes in the kitchen clinking together, as if the cupboards were shaking. I took off my headphones. The house was quiet for a second, and then there was another deep thud, this time against the glass. I went to the top of the stairs and glanced toward the living room. Through the reflection in a mirror hanging on the wall, I saw movement. Someone outside. My stomach twisted when I realized what I was seeing. A man standing at my back window, hitting the glass with what looked like a crowbar. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, and from where I stood, I could see his arm jerking with each impact. He hadn't seen me yet. I stayed frozen, watching him move toward the front of the house. Then came the sound of metal against wood. He was now hitting the front door. Something in me clicked. I grabbed a kitchen knife and pressed my weight against the door, praying it would hold. The banging grew louder, harder, each hit shaking the whole frame. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe, but I yelled through the door that the police were on the phone and that he needed to leave. I wasn't actually on the phone, but it must have worked. After one final blow, the sound stopped. Then I heard footsteps running and a car engine starting up in the distance. I finally did call the police for real. When I hung up, I just sat there shaking and crying. I'd been seconds away from what could have been the worst night of my life. About 10 minutes later, a patrol car arrived. They searched around the property, but whoever it was had disappeared. They told me they'd keep an eye on the area for the next few nights, but I knew deep down he'd be long gone by then. That night stuck with me. I still live in that house, and sometimes I catch myself listening for sounds I hope I'll never hear again. If there's anything I learned from it, It's this. When something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Because sometimes what you think is just a childish prank might be something far more dangerous.